These days, it really can seem like there's a new combat drone being announced every other day, and I will be the first to admit that it can be tough to keep up with them all. Part of the problem, of course, is that we use the word drone to describe everything from the miniature quadcopters you can find in the toy aisle of your local Walmart to bomber-sized spy planes operating at higher altitudes than most fighter jets could even reach. But every once in a while, a new drone program emerges that stands out from the pack. Platforms that promise to do more than just collect intelligence or deliver explosives, or that represent what could be both a practical and a meaningful change in the way nations wage war. Platforms that aim to truly blur the lines between the roles drones and crewed aircraft each play in modern conflict, or that promise to reshape the nature of these roles entirely. And that might just be how I would describe Shield AI's newly unveiled XBAT. And when I say newly unveiled, I mean literally just a few hours ago. This is a new drone platform that promises to do more than any combat drone in the world can today. And to be honest, more than a lot of crewed fighters are capable of to boot. This truly multi-role drone fighter has more in common with advanced jets like the F-35 than it does with uncrewed assets like the MQ-9 Reaper, boasting a full onboard suite of advanced avionics including a fire control radar, internal weapons bays capable of carrying air-to-ground and air-to-air loadouts while minimizing its radar detectability. With vertical takeoff and landing capabilities, it needs no runways to function. And on top of all that, it offers a combat radius of more than 1,150 miles without refueling. Now make no mistake, if this new aircraft, unveiled to the public literally just a few hours ago, had a cockpit, it would be touted as potentially becoming one of the most advanced and capable new fighters on the planet. But it doesn't have a cockpit. And instead, it was built from the ground up to leverage Shield AI's Hivemind AI autonomy software, allowing it to operate and complete its mission even when GPS and communications are jammed. Put simply, Shield AI's XBAT isn't a drone with some fighter capabilities, it's a fighter that happens to be a drone. And that has the potential to be a very big deal. So let's talk about why. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is a special edition of Air Power. Well, Russia is once again threatening nuclear war, this time over how President Trump is reportedly considering transferring Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles to Ukraine. And I've been staying on top of all this with Ground News. Ground News is an aggregator that collects articles published by news outlets all over the world and places them all into a single easy-to-read feed that makes it easy to not just stay on top of what's going on, but also to poke holes through the most common forms of modern media bias. Right here on Ground News, I can see that 47 outlets have already covered this story, including 11 left-leaning outlets and 11 right-leaning ones. Now, left-leaning outlets really seemed to emphasize the risk of nuclear escalation, with headlines like Putin ally warns Trump giving missiles to Ukraine could mean nuclear war, while right-leaning outlets were often a lot more reserved with their takes, running headlines like Russia warns US government, Moscow, Tomahawk supply could go bad for Trump. Now, Ground News also provides you with other vital information about these outlets along with their headlines, like their political bias, their factuality rating, their corporate ownership, or government affiliations. And I love the Ground News For You tab that compiles stories that are sure to interest me because they're based on topics that I've chosen to stay on top of. Ground News is a big part of my day-to-day news consumption and, of course, my research, and it can be for you too. Just go to ground.news/sandboxx with 2 X's or, follow the link in the description below to get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use every day. Again, that's ground.news/sandboxx to get 40% off their Vantage plan that will help you stay on top of things. On August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union conducted its first test detonation of a nuclear weapon in modern-day Kazakhstan, officially ending America's atomic monopoly and thrusting the world into a new era of nuclear competition. Before long, these nations massed nuclear stockpiles with warheads in the tens of thousands, and it was becoming clear that the next global conflict would assuredly be waged by bombers traversing thousands of miles to deliver hydrogen bomb hellfire to military and civilian targets alike. In this pre-ICBM age, both American and Soviet nuclear plans relied on strategic bombers that were large and powerful enough to carry both heavy nuclear payloads and enough fuel to deliver them. And as a result, both nations formed defensive strategies around using fast-flying intercept fighters to bring those bombers down before they could. And it wasn't long before Uncle Sam came to realize that with both offensive and defensive strategies entirely reliant on the use of strategically positioned and well-manicured runways, well, those same runways would logically become among the very first targets struck in the initial stages of World War III. So the decision was made to develop new fighter aircraft that weren't reliant on runways at all. And within a year of Russia's first atomic test, the US Navy was already fielding proposals from both Convair and Lockheed for tail-sitting vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL, fighters that could operate from warships without dedicated flight decks or from land without runways. Now, these aircraft would literally take off and land with their nose pointed straight to the sky, like a SpaceX rocket, except using propellers. Lockheed's answer was the turboprop-powered XFV-1, designed by none other than the legendary Kelly Johnson. And while this aircraft did manage 32 fairly successful test flights, its 5,850 horsepower engine just wasn't enough for a truly effective VTOL design. Convair's Pogo was more successful, recording some 70 test flights, but it also struggled during takeoff and landing, in no small part because pilots had to look over their shoulder like they were backing into a parking space, except while hovering, nose up, and backing into the ground. By 1956, the US Navy gave up on the idea of tail-sitting VTOL fighters, and it would be another 13 years before the Brits' Harrier would enter service as the world's first VTOL, technically VSTOL for vertical and or short takeoff and landing, attack aircraft. And the world wouldn't see a truly vertical landing multi-role fighter enter operational service for nearly another half-century, when the Marine Corps' first F-35Bs came online. Now today, some 10 years later, the F-35B is still the only operational fighter in history to reach supersonic speeds and then land vertically. But even the most technologically advanced fighter in history still lacks the ability to completely do away with the multi-role fighter's reliance on runways, as it can't take off vertically while carrying a combat load, and still needs at least a good 300 to 400 feet of runway to get airborne. Now that is a fraction of what its runway queen sibling, the F-35A, requires, but it can still be a limiting factor in combat. But now, Shield AI believes they finally got the design and the technology to build a true multi-role fighter that is entirely free of this pesky runway addiction. And while today, reducing America's military reliance on runways is less about planning for nuclear war, in reality, it is a more pressing need than ever. In the vast expanses of the Pacific, China has invested heavily into an arsenal of long-range weapon systems that include cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, kamikaze drones, and hypersonic weapons, all with the express purpose of wiping American military assets off of the map before they can even get into the fight. In the initial days of a Sino-American war, China would use saturation attacks of mixed weapons, overwhelming local air defenses with combinations of drones and different types of missiles to rain hell onto American and Allied airstrips all throughout the region. Aircraft and runways would be targeted, as China aimed to reduce American combat capacity while also limiting the ability of reinforcements to use those same facilities in the aftermath. In fact, I'll quote the Center for Strategic and International Studies report on wargaming and American defense of Taiwan that was published in 2023. Quote, "To give an Air Force illustration, late deploying units to Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa will land at a base that has entire squadrons of wrecked US and Japanese aircraft bulldozed to the side of the runway, hundreds of wounded in the base hospital, and temporary cemeteries to handle the many dead. Missile attacks and air combat will have wiped out squadrons that arrived only a few days earlier." Now, the Air Force, of course, is already planning to mitigate this potential scenario, mostly through the use of Agile Combat Employment, or ACE operations, which involves distributing combat aircraft and support assets and personnel to dispersed austere runways, highways, and the like to complicate targeting for Chinese attackers. It is an objectively imperfect solution, but maybe the most feasible one, because building sufficiently reinforced aircraft hangars and bunkers for all the combat jets America and its allies have, and not to mention their support staff, just isn't financially feasible. And no matter how many air defense interceptors you stockpile on site, every system has a saturation point at which it just can't bring down any more threats. But both the Center for Strategic and International Studies and the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies have highlighted in their own respective wargames how drone fighters, often referred to as collaborative combat aircraft or CCAs, could have a huge impact in this fight. This time, I'll quote the Mitchell Institute's report on wargaming efforts. Quote, "CCAs that can operate from short runways or launch without runways would help create a more dispersed, resilient forward posture. A network of distributed CCA operating locations would also complicate the PLA's ability to find, fix, and attack the Air Force's counter-air forces when they are most vulnerable, on the ground, and preparing for combat sorties." Now, the Mitchell Institute went on to establish a series of combat drone categories, defining each by the hypothetical capabilities that they would need to deliver. Now, several of these categories could honestly be filled by existing drone platforms that are either already in testing or even already in service, like the RQ-170 Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Aircraft, and new drone wingmen, or CCAs, like the YFQ-42 and the YFQ-44, not to mention others like the XQ-58 Valkyrie. But the cornerstones of many of the Mitchell Institute's identified winning strategies were extremely high-end uncrewed systems that called for a list of capabilities that seemed, at least in 2023, to be, well, kind of unrealistic. These platforms, dubbed in the report CCA-1s, would be runway independent, with very low observable or VLO designs, and the afterburning turbofan engines necessary to achieve supersonic speeds, while still boasting an unrefueled range of 2,000 nautical miles. They would carry active electronically scanned array fire control radar, infrared search and track targeting, and hull air-to-air or air-to-ground loadouts internally that were comparable to what you could stuff into the fuselage of an F-35. This is a lot more capability than the Air Force expects to see from its first increment of CCA aircraft in testing today. Both General Atomics YFQ-42 and Anduril's YFQ-44 boast stealthy designs, but designs that probably fall short of being considered VLO, or very low observable. They're both reliant on runways for takeoff and landing, are both limited to subsonic flight, and neither is expected to reach further than 1,400 nautical miles. By the Mitchell Institute's rubric, these platforms would probably fall somewhere between CCA-5 and CCA-6 designations, but fall well short of the steep CCA-1 requirements they lay out. But to be fair, there really aren't many aircraft on the planet, even in testing, that could come close to those high-end requirements. It's possible that Lockheed Martin's recently unveiled Vectis drone fighter might meet a good portion of them, but until today, It was very literally the only drone with proposed capabilities that even come close. And that is where Shield AI's XBAT comes in. Because while most of today's combat drones and remotely piloted aircraft are designed around flying a small number of very specific mission sets, the XBAT was designed to serve as a true multi-role fighter that just so happens to be a drone. Over the past few weeks, I've had the opportunity to speak to some of the folks at Shield AI about this new platform, with the agreement that I wouldn't share anything about it until after it was officially unveiled. So, now that the cat's out of the bag, let's run through what we know about this promising drone fighter. And I'll start by quoting Armor Harris, Shield AI's Senior Vice President of Aircraft Engineering. Quote, XBAT is a revolution in air power because it combines four things: VTOL, range, multi-role capability, and autonomy. VTOL plus range solves survivability on the ground and dependency on tankers. Multi-role provides critical flexibility as the threat evolves because no plan survives first contact with the enemy. XBAT's ability to autonomously operate standalone or collaboratively allows it to project power when other assets aren't around and simplifies kill chains. Now, at 26 feet long, 39 feet wide, and 4.74 feet tall, this drone fighter is launched vertically, under the power of its single thrust vectoring afterburning turbofan engine. Now, in some of the testing footage, that engine looks to me like GE's F414, the same power plant that you can find in the Navy's FA-18 Super Hornets and Growlers, Saab's new Gripen E, and South Korea's stealthy new KF-21. Now, when I asked if I was right about that engine, Shield AI's team told me that the engine announcement won't come until next week, but they gave me reason to believe that I'm probably not too far off the mark. Regardless, that means it hits the Mitchell Institute's first wicket of being runway independent, as well as having the necessary power for supersonic performance. Now, the platform's dash speed is listed as classified, so we can't say that one for sure. According to Shield AI, the XBAT has an unrefueled range of 2,000 nautical miles, which is about 2,300 miles or about 3,700 kilometers for the non-pirates among us, and that hits another of the Mitchell Institute's CCA-1 criteria. It boasts a service ceiling of 50,000 feet, matching the likes of platforms like the F-35 and F-16, and a lot of these capabilities outpaced today's CCA drones in development from the Air Force's Increment 1 contract awards, and likewise are all but certain to exceed Increment 2's requirements that are yet to be released. And that got me wondering what contract Shield AI is hoping to secure with the XBAT. And I'll quote Armor Harris's response. XBAT represents a reimagining of air power. It requires no runways, is fully expeditionary, and delivers capabilities beyond the first Increment 1 CCAs, including electronic warfare, greater payload capacity, and extended range. We view Increment 1 CCAs as important and capable systems designed to meet the initial set of program requirements. XBAT, by contrast, was built to give combatant commanders geographically distributed long-range fires and effects. In other words, like Lockheed Martin's Vectis, Shield AI's XBAT isn't aiming for any of today's incremental contracts meant to mature air power autonomy and relatively single-minded platforms. Instead, it is focused very squarely on the not-too-distant future when drone fighters are meant to be much more than just some extra rails for missiles to be launched from. Now, promotional materials show the XBAT flying with an air-to-air loadout of two AIM-120 AMRAAMs, which offer a broadly similar size and form function to the Air Force's new Beyond Visual Range AIM-260 Joint Advanced Tactical Missile, so it's pretty safe to assume that it could stow those as well. It also shows the Navy's new and massive 1,900-pound AIM-174B Gunslinger, an air-to-air missile with what could be 300-plus-mile range, carried on an external pylon. For air-to-ground operations, it shows a pair of 1,000-pound class AGM-154 Joint Standoff Weapon C-1s, or JSOW C-1s, which are advanced glide bombs with two-way data links and multi-mode seekers that enable these weapons to close with stationary or even moving targets at ranges of around 80 miles. Externally, it's shown carrying an AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missile, or LRASM, which is an incredibly advanced cruise missile designed to use onboard artificial intelligence to hunt for, locate, and identify enemy warships before distributing them among other local weapons and finally determining the most vulnerable point on that warship to strike. These weapons are even heavier than the AIM-174 at 2,760 pounds. Now, the aircraft is shown to have an electronic warfare suite with the leading edges of its wings and part of the nose of the aircraft highlighted, and these could indicate conformal antennas, DRFM or digital radio frequency memory modules, or other sensor nodes used to either soak up or to broadcast different forms of electromagnetic energy. These materials also list a fire control radar, which, depending on whether or not it's an active electronically scanned array, which it seems likely that it would be, may also play a role in the aircraft's electronic warfare capabilities, though it also highlights that the XBAT's modular avionics bay makes it possible to quickly swap systems and capabilities into and out of the aircraft. Now, in order to offer such impressive range, the majority of the top of the fuselage is relegated to fuel storage. Now, all of these capabilities wouldn't just be significant, they would be class-leading. But what truly makes the XBAT special, or maybe more to the point, so strategically valuable, is its ability to take off and land vertically, just like the long-forgotten tail-sitters of the 1950s. This allows VBATs to be launched from just about anywhere you can reach with the aircraft's self-stabilizing trailer called the Launch Recovery Vehicle, or LRV. When it's time to launch the aircraft, its blast shield is lowered while the wings fold out, and then the aircraft is lifted into its vertical launch position. According to Shield AI, you can place 3 XBAT LRVs in the same space as one legacy fighter. Now, this makes for an exceedingly small footprint, allowing for these aircraft to be pre-positioned in a wide variety of austere environments, or just as importantly, from the deck of any surface ship with room for a trailer-sized launch pad, including cargo ships, amphibious assault ships, and a whole lot more. When the mission is over, the XBAT can return to where it was launched or anywhere else with LRVs for recovery. Now, the only area I can see where the XBAT really may fall short of some other combat drones in testing is in aerobatics, because the XBAT is expected to be limited to 4G maneuvers, but that isn't much of a surprise to me. With a very stealthy design, the XBAT is meant to hunt like a stealth fighter rather than duke it out like a Cold War cowboy. Now, one of the biggest selling points of the XBAT is its ability to operate autonomously, even in GPS and communications-denied environments, and that requires a great deal of software complexity. The underlying digital backbone of the XBAT is Shield AI's Hivemind mission autonomy software, which importantly leverages edge computing within its broader network. And in this context, edge computing means that these drones carry the necessary hardware on board to carry out tasks as they're assigned, rather than relying on guidance being provided by human operators via other networked assets. Of course, these platforms still take those tasks from human operators, but because of the level of autonomy provided by Hivemind, a single operator can manage entire formations of XBATs, which also makes these aircraft a very capable option for future Air Force or Navy collaborative combat aircraft contracts, as that human operator could easily be in a cockpit rather than on a ship or on the ground. And it's in that AI-based autonomy that Shield AI really shines. The firm's been developing drone autonomy capabilities since being founded just about a decade ago now by former Navy SEAL Brandon Sang, his brother Ryan, and their partner Andrew Ryder. Now, the impetus behind founding the company in the first place was a mission Sang participated in Afghanistan, in which his unit suffered casualties that he believed could have been avoided with better reconnaissance. So upon his return, the three men reportedly raised about $100,000 from family and friends to start development on their first AI-enabled drone, dubbed Nova. Within a year, they'd secured an autonomy software contract from the Defense Innovation Unit, and just 2 years later, the first Nova drones were deployed to the Middle East. But that's not the only place Shield AI's autonomy expertise comes from, especially in the fighter jet world. In 2021, the quickly growing firm announced its acquisition of Heron Systems, a name that might ring a bell if you've been following DARPA's AI fighter pilot efforts. All the way back in 2019, DARPA kicked off its Alpha Dogfight trials, which pitted a group of AI system developers against one another in simulated F-16 within visual range, guns-only dogfights. By the end of the tournament, the winner, Heron Systems, was then able to pit its AI fighter pilot against a real human F-16 pilot in a virtual environment. The Heron AI was both precise and aggressive, maybe even more than a human pilot would have been for the sake of maintaining the safety of its own aircraft. But that combination worked, with Heron's AI ultimately going undefeated against the human fighter pilot in 5 consecutive bouts. Now, all that is to say that this platform and the concept behind it is very promising. But promises alone don't win wars. In order to be as revolutionary as I honestly think the XBAT really could be, it's got to start flying first. Now, Shield AI currently plans to begin VTOL and then further flight testing in the fall of 2026, with the aircraft ready for service by 2028 and in production starting in 2029. And that is a very aggressive timeline. But then that also comes as no surprise from a company founded in part by a Navy SEAL with the express goal of bringing autonomous VTOL platforms to the fight to save American lives. So rest assured, I will be keeping my eye on this program as it matures towards service, and you better believe I'll be keeping you up to date. And with that, ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.